Good morning, all. I'm Dwight Keene. I'm chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission. I'm joined this morning by fellow commissioner Susan Duffy. At this time, I will call to order this meeting of the Kansas Corporation Commission on this 5th day of May 2022. Without any question, happy Cinco de Mayo to everyone. The first matters on our agenda this morning are 10 items on the consent agenda. So I would turn to you, Commissioner Duffy. Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns about any of these items?
Good morning, Chair Keene. I have no questions or comments. I move approval for the 10 items on the consent agenda.
Very well. I would second that. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I would call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. Next up, we have a few noticed items, the first of which is docket number 22-QWCT-495-COM. This is in the matter of the complaint against CenturyLink by Roy Peterson. Before us this morning is an order on a prima facie determination, and our presenter is our general counsel, Brian Fedotin. Good morning, Brian.
Yes, good morning, commissioners. I'm going to wait a second. Oh, it looked like Commissioner French just joined us, so I was going to give him a second to join, but it looks like he's joined.
I am on. Apologies.
No problems. Good to have you with us.
On April 27th, Roy Peterson filed a formal complaint against CenturyLink, alleging they delayed porting his phone number to a mobile phone carrier and charged him for services several months after he discontinued service. Based on the formal complaint, it meets the procedural requirements of KAR 82-1-220B, and therefore this order directs it to be served upon CenturyLink for an answer within 10 days. With that, I'm available for questions.
All right, thank you, Brian. Let's see if there are any questions, comments, or concerns. I'll turn first to Commissioner French.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Duffy.
I have no questions, and I move approval of the order.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We approve the order in this matter. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Next matter up is docket number 22-NETE-419-COC. This is an order on Evergy's motion to modify the protective order in Neat Southwest petition for clarification of reconsideration of and rehearing of the order granting Evergy intervention and the protective order and the discovery order. Our presenter this morning is Assistant General Counsel David Cohen. Good morning, David.
Good morning, commissioners. Yeah, the title on that order was kind of a mouthful, isn't it?
Before you, a good part of it, yes.
Yeah. But before you is an order which amends the Commission's April 21st protective and discovery order. On February 28th, 2022, NextEra Transmission Southwest LLC filed an application for a certificate of public convenience and necessity to build the Wolf Creek to Blackberry transmission project. NextEra won a competitive bid process from the Southwest Power Pool to build this project. On March 11th, Evergy filed a petition to intervene. Evergy was also a bidder on this project. On March 21st, NextEra filed limited opposition to Evergy's intervention. In that filing, NextEra requested a two-tier discovery and protective order. Under the proposed order, confidential information would be broken into subcategories of confidential and confidential competitive. While confidential had the same definition that the Commission normally uses, confidential competitive was to be used for items that were competitively sensitive for the purpose of future bidding. Confidential competitive documents would only be provided to parties who are competitors of NextEra on an outside counsel, outside expert basis. In subsequent filings, NextEra identified 3 specific items that required special protection. On April 21st, the commission issued an order which was similar to the requested protective and discovery order in that it created a two-tier protective order scheme, but it limited the higher confidential competitive designation just to the 3 items that were specifically identified by NextEra. On April 25th, Evergy filed a petition to amend the protective and discovery order. Evergy had received a discovery request from staff that requested their competitive bid, and they wanted the same protections offered to NextEra for Evergy's home protective for competitive bid. On April 26th, NextEra filed a petition for reconsideration. NextEra contends that the previous protective and discovery order was overly limiting and that there was additional information that might be deserving of protection, and that if we don't amend it, we will be subject to a series of motions to amend, such as the one filed by Evergy the previous day. One of the reasons NextEra requested and the commission granted this two-tiered protective and discovery order was in order to maintain the confidentiality that was part of the SPP's bidding process. Basically, SPP doesn't disclose this information, and so we shouldn't provide a method to circumvent that by allowing other competitor parties to receive that information through discovery. So the order before you amends our definition of confidential competitive and adds to it. So it includes things that were submitted to SPP as confidential. And it also allows any other information so designated by the commission. It sets forth our reasoning that we want to balance the interests of the parties in order to be able to make their case. The interest of the public at large is interested in learning as much as they can about this case, and also the interest of the parties who need confidential information protected. The final paragraph reminds parties that there is a method to challenge a designation of confidential competitive, and that so certain things that they believe they need, there's a method to get that. It's not just an automatic cutoff. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much, David. Excellent overview. Let's turn to my colleagues and see if you have any, if we have any questions, comments, or concerns. I'll turn first this time to Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. I believe that with this order, we have threaded the needle. And I don't know how else to describe it, but I appreciate the effort of staff to reconcile all of our thoughts as commissioners, taking into account the information that was provided. So thank you, David, for your work on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Duffy. Commissioner French.
Thanks. Thank you, David. That's a great overview. I just offer following observation, just to reiterate that these higher level of protections only apply to the parties that are competing against each other, staff, CURB, any other intervening party that's not a developer, transmission developer, competing party receives all the information so long as they file an NDA. The other observation I would make is it does appear with Evergy's filing that these competing parties all basically have the same interest to protect their underlying data that underlies their competitive bids. And so I would hope that they would work together in the discovery process to cordially exchange information and respect each other's interests in maintaining the integrity of that data underlying their bids. So I'm hoping it can work out between the parties as it often does in discovery. So that would be my only other observation, and I move approval of the order.
I second the motion.
Moving and seconded, we approve the order. Is there any further discussion? I'll add my 2 cents worth at this time as well. I would certainly embrace the observations of both of my fellow commissioners. I add my own metaphor to the pile. I guess I think it does strike what we come up with here, a real balance. balance that asks the parties to basically adhere to standards they previously agreed to in terms of certainly this confidential competitive designation. And I, like Commissioner French and Commissioner Duffy, am hopeful that this balance, having been struck by us here, and I think it's a fair one, will provide workable for all the parties. And I too would join my colleagues in thanking you, David, for your efforts in reconciling all the competing interests that we were trying to reconcile in this case, and I think come up with a pretty good order. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
The final notice item this morning is docket number 22-CONS-3046-CPEN. This is in the matter of the failure of Fuel Source, Inc. as an operator to comply with KAR 82-3-120. Before us is a final order, and our presenter is Assistant General Counsel Jonathan Myers. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Chair King. Good morning, Commissioners. Before you is a final order affirming the Commission's penalty order in this matter. I recommend approval of the order, and I am available for questions.
All right, thank you, John. Let's see if there are any questions, comments, or concerns. I'll turn this time first to Commissioner French.
No questions. Thank you, John. Yeah, no questions at this time.
Commissioner Duffy.
I have no questions, and I move approval of the order.
Second the motion.
Then moved to second, we approve the order in this docket. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Thank you, John. Okay, the final matter for our consideration this morning is an important one. We have a presentation regarding coal combustion residuals, and we have two presenters with us this morning. At least I'm hoping they're there. The first of which is Julie Coleman.
Yes,
morning,
I am
Julie.
here. Good morning.
Good morning. Julie is the Director of the Bureau of Waste Management for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Joining her as well is Mindy Bowman. Good morning, Wendy.
Good morning.
Mindy, pardon me, who is the Chief of Solid Waste Permits Section, again with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. We're pleased that you've both seen fit to join us this morning and provide us with some educational and background information regarding this topic. So with that being said, Julie and Mindy, we'll turn the program over to you.
Very good. Thank you. And I think Denise is going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation and run it for me, since after 2 years, I'm still not very reliable trying to run my own PowerPoints on Zoom. So I'm always happy for the technical support and assistance. Thank you for introducing us already. Mindy and I work closely together and have been involved in this issue of coal combustion residuals for several years. So we're happy to get to talk to you a little bit about it. Can you move forward, please, Denise? So I hope to give you just a kind of a high level overview, but then entertain any questions that you want to dig into more deeply. But, coal combustion residual is been generated by coal-fired power plants, since there have been coal-fired power plants. It's essentially the coal ash, the fly ash, and the bottom ash that's generated when coal is burned for electricity. It does contain a variety of contaminants that have some environmental and public health concern, primarily heavy metals like mercury and arsenic and cadmium are contaminants that are carried in that coal ash. And historically in Kansas and across the country, those coal ashes have been disposed in landfills or in surface impoundments that are associated with the facilities that are burning the coal. And in Kansas, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment has permitted and regulated these landfills and surface impoundments as permitted solid waste facilities for many, many decades. So our regulatory oversight of these disposal units is not new, but it's changing, as we'll discuss throughout this presentation. So next slide, please, Denise. Great. So just digging a little bit more deeply into KDHE's current regulatory oversight. We do have a statute that authorizes and directs us to issue permits for these coal ash landfills and surface impoundments. So we have permits in place for all of our facilities that dispose of coal ash. Then we've got a series of regulations that govern how they operate. I picked up a few key ones because they're related to what is happening at the federal level. We have requirements for public notice anytime we permit a new facility or a significant modification to an existing facility. We have requirements for closures, and we have some standards for operating, design, monitoring. Next slide, please. So within the last about 7 years, the federal government has become more engaged in the regulation of coal ash disposal units. Their involvement was driven by two pretty significant environmental disasters, I'll call them, that occurred. In 2008, there was a major CCR dike failure near Kingston, Tennessee, released over 5 million cubic yards of coal ash into nearby water bodies that eventually discharged into the Emory River. In 2014, there was a storm sewer line failure under an ash pond in North Carolina, Eden, North Carolina, that released about 50,000 tons, more than 50,000 tons of coal ash and 27 million gallons of ash pond wastewater into the Dan River. So there were significant environmental and economic and property damages resulting from both of those incidents. And that prompted EPA to begin looking very closely at coal ash disposal units across the country. They came into every state. They did inspections of these facilities that had coal ash disposal units, trying to understand the magnitude of the potential environmental and public health concerns associated with them, and subsequently started a series of rulemaking to provide federal regulatory oversight. They kind of the rule-making actions of the EPA focus generally in 3 broad areas: addressing groundwater impacts from both existing and any proposed new disposal units in the future. And those are both preventative in nature by establishing liner requirements, and responsive in nature by establishing a lot of groundwater monitoring and potentially corrective actions resulting from data obtained from groundwater monitoring. A second area of focus is to minimize blowing dust that's associated with the ground storage of CCR, and to reduce the potential for dispersion of contaminants in the air. And finally, the federal rules, the third big focus area is to prevent future catastrophic failures of dike failures of the dikes on surface impoundments that resulted in the Tennessee and the North Carolina disasters. So the state of federal rulemaking is a study in and of itself, and I won't even try to go into any great detail right now, but Their first federal rule, what they call the first national rule on coal combustion residuals, was promulgated in 2015. And ever since then, there has been a series of a number of federal court vacatures, remands, new rule makings that is just ongoing. So there are multiple proposed amendments to the national rule and new rules that are under review right now. So it's a work in progress. It's a dynamic process. It's shifting and changing a lot, which makes it, challenging to keep up with what's happening on the federal scene. One of the proposed rules that's in process right now, that the importance of this will become apparent a little later in this discussion, is that the federal government, the EPA, will issue permits. They'll adopt a federal permitting program and issue permits at the federal level for these coal ash disposal units. And obviously that creates some dual permitting activity at both the state and the federal level. Next slide, please, Denise. So we wanted to give you an idea of where and how many of these disposal units there are in Kansas. Really, there's just a handful of them. Mindy's unit manages about 360 solid waste facility permits across the state. Only I think 8 of those permits, 7 or 8, are for facilities that you see on this map where there are coal combustion disposal units located. But any one of these facilities can have multiple units. So Denise, if you would, let's just pick one. Let's go to the box that says Lawrence, if you can see it. If you'll hover over that box and click on it, it'll allow us to, we should be able to, if this is working right, zoom in on, is it working, Denise? We should be able to zoom in on the individual disposal units that are at the Lawrence Energy Center. Maybe it's not working. Well, I'm sorry if that's not working. We tested it here and it was working fine, but what we hoped to be able to show you is that at any one of these facilities that are permitted for the disposal and management of coal ash, there can be multiple individual units. So for example, we have one permit issued to the Lawrence Energy Center, but there are several coal ash ponds, what we call surface impoundments, where the coal ash is kind of suspended in blowdown water from the facilities, really. So it's suspended in water. So they're ponds, essentially. When I say surface impoundment, just think of a pond where there's both the coal ash solids and a lot of water also. There are also landfills, which are dry, presumably dry disposal units. And across the state, there's a total of 24 total coal ash disposal units among these 8 permitted facilities. So I think one of the points I'm trying to make here is that of the 360 permitted facilities, solid waste facilities we manage in Kansas, only 8 of them are these facilities that have coal ash ponds. So it's a very small percentage of our overall universe, but the work associated, especially with the federal rule and oversight of these, is pretty substantial. You can move on to the next slide, please, Denise. I was really hopeful I could show you the map. I can, as she's advancing to the next slide, tell you that I think I hope I said this right. There are 24 total disposal units, only 16 of which are currently subject to the federal rule. And let me repeat that because I don't know that I stated that clearly enough. 8 facilities that have state permits for operating disposal, coal ash disposal units. Between those 8 permitted facilities, there are a total of 24 disposal units, either landfills or surface impoundments. Also, you can call those ponds if it gives you a better visual. And of those 24, currently, only 16 are subject to the federal rules that are in place. The first national rule that was adopted in 2015, and then will be subject to any future rulemaking that's promulgated. So I mentioned that KDHE already issues permits for these facilities, and under the federal rule, there will be federal permits issued also. So we have this potential for dual permitting, which just gets kind of messy. So what KDHE wants to do, and what we are in the process of doing, is revising our state regulations to adopt the federal rules. And our intent is, for the most part, just to adopt by reference. We have to make some wording revisions to reflect our, kind of our state regulatory structure. But for the most part, we're initially adopting that first national rule I referred to. And that's the first step in pursuing federal program delegation. So we first have to adopt the rules, and then we can apply to EPA for program delegation, so that we would then administer the federal program in lieu of EPA. And so that kind of puts the regulatory oversight in the state's hands and avoids dual permitting and dual regulatory oversight.
Well, it's not.
So those are 2 of the reasons that we want to pursue federal program delegation. Can everyone hear me okay?
Maybe we just need to talk. I'm running a slideshow.
I think we're getting some sound from IT.
Okay.
If Denise could go on mute, that would be good.
Okay. But the third reason, and the big reason that we want to pursue federal program delegation, is that both the EPA and the industry in Kansas, Evergy, Empire District, Kansas City BPU, Sunflower, those are the 4 big utilities. They have come to us and said, please apply for approval to run the federal program. They don't want to deal with dual regulatory oversight. They don't want to deal with dual permitting. They know that our permit staff are already knowledgeable of the sites, have good understanding of how the sites are currently situated. So they just, and EPA has told us that, and they really prefer that the state adopt the program. That EPA, and they've said this to us, they are not in the business of issuing permits. It's not what they do. And they want to rely on the state's expertise and established kind of permitting programs. So we are willing to do that. We see the sense and the efficiencies in doing that. So we're proceeding with that. It's in process. I'll talk a little bit more about it in just a minute, but let's go on next to the next slide. These slides were kind of designed to answer some of the questions that David had told me you all are interested in. So I apologize if they're not in the best order, but did we skip a slide, Denise? There should have been a graphic that shows the tons of, there we go. Okay, thank you. I know that you had a question about how much coal ash is generated in Kansas. So this graph isn't the complete picture, but it's the piece of that, the piece of the answer that I have data for. So the utilities have to report to us the tons of coal ash that they dispose in the landfills that are at their sites for which we have permits issued. So what this graph shows you is for about the last 10 years, the tons of coal ash disposed in our permitted coal ash landfills. And you can see pretty quickly that that number is going down. And that's because of, logically, you understand that that's because a lot of the utilities are changing their portfolios of resources for power generation. So, but this shows you that in 2012 there were just over a million tons of coal ash disposed in the permitted landfills, and as of 2021, there was just over 600,000 tons of coal ash disposed in the landfills. But that's not the complete picture. What we don't have data on is coal ash that is hauled by landfills or by the facilities to landfills in other states. We don't have the data on how much coal ash is discharged into the surface impoundments or those ponds, although eventually that coal ash is removed from ponds and then would go to a landfill. So we will ultimately get that data, that tonnage data, once it's landfill. And we have some data on beneficial reuse. And I know one of the questions David relayed that you're interested in is coal ash beneficially reused? Yes, it is. That is part of the federal rulemaking that's in process right now, or the federal criteria for what constitutes an acceptable beneficial reuse. But in the state of Kansas, we had already approved beneficial reuse under existing state statutes of some coal ash, and a good example of beneficial reuse that's been ongoing in Kansas for a long time is using coal ash as backfill in underground mines to stabilize those mines. There are two big caverns in Kansas City, the Inland Mine and the Holland Mine, and coal ash has been injected into those for stabilization. Between 2017 and 2021, about 246,000 tons of coal ash used for that beneficial reuse.
Julie, if I could ask a question, when you
Yes.
said beneficial reuse, my mind went somewhere else, because one of the hot topics in our industry now is actually trying to mine the rare earth minerals from the coal ash. Is that part of that discussion as well?
I am not aware of that discussion going on. Mindy, do you know if at the federal level, if that's one of the things that's addressed in federal rules?
I have not seen any specific discussion on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's new. It's a whole new ball of wax, but and I think it's related to the difficulty of batteries and mining rare earth minerals in other places, and starting to look at potential sources within our country. So I wonder if I know that's probably something far out, probably something that's coming and is going to open a whole new ball of problems for us.
Yeah.
So
that really is interesting, and I hadn't heard about that. So
and there is a private entity that is extracting the rare earth minerals. There is a project, and I cannot remember where it is, but they are going back to old piles and they are extracting some of those minerals. And so I also believe that DOE has looked at that as well as a potential and the lab's potential project.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Doesn't fall under what we're doing, but yeah, when we use the term beneficial reuse, it's typically applications like, you know, I gave you this example, but I know fly ash sometimes is used in the preparation of beds for road construction. You know, it kind of has some cement-like properties and qualities. So, you know, there are beneficial uses for coal ash that will be allowed under the federal rule. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I've mentioned this. We are seeking approval to administer the federal program. We'll first have to adopt the federal rules, and what we're working on right now is the first national rule and a few revisions to the first national rule that were promulgated in 2020. We work really closely with EPA. We're kind of discussing our revisions with EPA as we go, because when we submit our application for federal program delegation, the rule packet has to be in there, but typically EPA won't review our rule packet until until they've been adopted at the state level. And we want to avoid having EPA further down the road after we've gone through the whole state regulatory process say, oh, we don't approve this piece of what you adopted, and having to start again. But we also know that because of all the remands, vacatures, new rulemaking, we're going to have to constantly stay on top of what's happening with the federal rulemaking process. And we'll probably have to, after we get this first set of regulations adopted, have to propose future revisions to incorporate new federal rules in order to maintain our federal program approval. So it's going to be a work in process. We will also have to reissue our state permits. Once we have an approved program, we will have to reissue all of our state permits to incorporate all of the federal requirements that we are now going to oversee and enforce through our state permits. So it will be a program that we'll need to invest, you know, resources to ongoing into the future. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned this. We want to avoid dual permitting. We have site knowledge, and EPA wants us to do this. So, and the industry wants us to do this. Next slide, please. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I guess these next 4 slides all just kind of at a very high level list the provisions that will be in the federal rules that we're adopting. And I think what I will say is that by adopting the federal rules, it does enhance and strengthen our state rules. Our state rules, specifically regard to these types of landfills, industrial landfills, are not very comprehensive. So there are some, you know, there are those benefits to us adopting the federal rules. But federal rules apply to both the landfills and the surface impoundments. They have requirements not only for future construction of new disposal units, but provisions for all of the existing units and lateral expansions of existing units that will be much more intensive than any of the requirements that those existing units have had to comply with to date. And then there's a big question of what's been called legacy units. The federal rule, that first national rule, initially would allow units that ceased accepting coal ash and that had closed prior to the first national rule adoption in 2015 would have exempted those older units from federal regulation, but that is under review now. So, earlier I said currently there are 16 of these disposal units in Kansas that are subject to federal. That could change. That number could change if some legacy units get pulled in the future. Next slide, please. There are also location restrictions, for example, construction in floodplains, construction within 5 feet of surface water. There's kind of a big issue right now nationally about EPA is discovering some of old units that actually there is groundwater infiltrating the disposal unit, and they have some expectation for states to address that. There are specific design criteria like much more stringent liner requirements to prevent groundwater infiltration and construction and maintenance of the dikes for surface impoundments to prevent catastrophic releases. There are just routine operating criteria detailed in the federal rule. Next slide, please. Requirements for routine inspections of all units and dikes, requirements for groundwater monitoring, although the state of Kansas already does require our landfills and surface impoundments to do groundwater monitoring, and we do share that data with EPA per their request, but the federal rule has more groundwater monitoring requirements than we currently have, including standards for corrective action, additional standards for what would trigger corrective action. And there are additional closure and post-closure care requirements in the federal rules. And once again, I'll just say our state rules already have some of this, but the federal rules go further. So all of these facilities, implement and comply with the state rules, but there are going to be substantial new requirements, and there already are substantial new requirements. Next slide, please. Oh, and finally, just record keeping and reporting requirements. All the sites are required now to maintain publicly accessible websites. So if you go to any of these utilities websites, Evergy is a good example because they own and operate most of these units in Kansas. You will find a whole page dedicated to CCR, every groundwater monitoring report, every operating report, there's all kinds of reports on their website that they're required to post and make accessible to the public under the federal rule. And I already talked about beneficial use criteria that will be established in federal rules. There are hundreds of pages of these regulations, not surprisingly. So it is a challenge for us to keep up with those within our existing at our existing staffing levels. That's a big challenge for us. And therefore, if you'll go to the next slide, takes us to this final slide. I know you're interested in Senate Bill 417 that passed this session, has been signed by the governor. So we knew that this was going to be a big workload, and we don't have the resources to take it on and do it competently. Just a little bit of background, our solid waste program in Kansas is funded almost exclusively. 97% of our funding comes from a $1 tonnage fee on waste that is disposed in Kansas permitted landfills. That $1 tonnage fee was set by statute in 1995 and has never been changed. And interestingly, industrial landfills by statute are exempt from paying the tonnage fee. So you saw the tonnage that goes into those units, but they don't have to pay the tonnage fee. The other small percentage of our solid waste management fund that supports all of our solid waste program activities, we don't get general fund, we don't get federal financial assistance. It's all this, almost all this $1 tonnage fee. But we also are directed and authorized by statute to renew all of our permits annually and to collect an annual permit renewal fee. That annual permit renewal fee, however, has a cap in statute. Our cap prior to Senate Bill 417 were capped by the statute at $4,000 for annual renewal fees, and then we had subsequently adopted regulations setting the schedule of renewal fees. When industry came to us, and said, please pursue this, we said, we're interested, we're willing, we have to figure out a source of revenue. They supported going to the legislature and requesting that the statute be revised to increase the annual permit renewal fee, that cap, for coal combustion residual disposal units only. So under 417 now, the new annual renewal fees for these units becomes effective on September 1st, and the annual renewal fee will be on a per disposal unit basis versus prior to this, it was on a per facility basis. So for example, prior to 417, we were collecting $24,000 a year in permit renewal fees for these, for the electric utilities that had these units, $24,000 a year total to manage their permits. Now, under this new rule, the minimum fee is set at $12,000 and the maximum annual renewal fee is set at $16,000. We're working on regulations. That number will probably have to vary from year to year, depending on how many units come into or out of the federal regulatory framework. And we'll work with industry on that. But the industry supported that, and the industry introduced the bill. So they took the bill, introduced it in the legislature, and we were able to get that permit fee cap changed for them. So that'll allow us to move forward. We'll use that funding. The minimum is set at $12,000 per year, and that first renewal fee will come due September 1st and will generate about $195,000. And that will support a full-time engineer, a half-time environmental specialist to assist with, reviewing all the groundwater monitoring, sampling and analysis plans and reports, and also tracking and working on future state rule revisions to follow federal promulgations. So there's a lot going on. The engineer will be in Mindy's unit. And I know she's thrilled to have someone she can dedicate to that, because it's been a big workload, even though it's a small number of facilities. I'm going to stop and let you ask questions.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. We appreciate the presentation. Let's see if there are questions. Turn to Commissioner Duffy first. Your mic is on mute.
There we go. Thank you very much. As I was talking to you earlier, I was reading all these stories and not understanding nationwide. Okay, I'm hearing these stories, but what are we doing in Kansas? And I really do appreciate both you and Mindy coming here today, Julie, and explaining this process. Yes, I do have a few questions. Why would the utilities take their ash or their coal, whatever, and go across to another state to get rid of it when they have the ability? And are these right on site, the disposal entities? Are they on the actual site where the coal plant is?
So let me ask your second question.
Okay,
Answer that first. Yes, they are all on site.
all right.
Is that
So why
correct,
would
Mindy?
anybody move anything?
You mean take the coal across state line to another landfill?
Yes,
Here's my speculative answer, and that's because a landfill in a neighboring state might charge them a lower tipping fee at the landfill. So there's two things that happen at a landfill. Anyone who takes waste to any landfill, the landfill is going to charge that person, that entity, a tipping fee. That's how the landfill makes their revenue
okay,
to operate their landfill. Then they skim $1 off the top of their tipping fee and they send it to the state. So, one reason a utility might send it to a neighboring state is because the neighboring state landfill charges a lower tipping fee.
okay. So when they transport, are they transporting in what, great big dump trucks, or how is that transported, on a train? A kind of coal train? How is that transported?
Mindy, what do you know?
I do not know. The one time that I was approached about an alternate place to dispose, they were planning to transport to the alternate location with trucks. I don't know if that's their normal method of transportation.
Yeah, I'm trying to visualize having seen railroad tracks running in close proximity to any of those facilities.
They do have.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they're bringing the coal in,
Yeah.
then I'm wondering if the residue goes out the same way it came in
Yeah,
via the track.
right. I'm sure it's a combination of both, depending on where it's ending up.
Okay, all right. Also, as it relates to these sites, have we had any serious disasters or malfunctions of liners, or we've had 30 wind events in the first 4 months of the year. Is that an issue with blowing ash?
I don't believe we get blowing ash complaints ever. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Mindy, can you? Blowing ash complaints?
I have not heard of a blowing ash complaint.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not in Kansas.
Apparently, that is a real problem in other states, and especially where they're located in disadvantaged areas.
Yeah.
And the carcinogens have been, now they're making that causal link with public health problems of folks who have lived in the neighborhood their whole lives.
I will say that it's probably been 6 to 8 years ago, we did get some complaints at the one of those mine stabilization sites, that Holiday mine, when they were actually injecting the coal ash into the mine. We had some complaints then about blowing dust, and we worked with the utilities who resolved those, but not at the facilities themselves.
Okay.
Yeah. Did that answer your question? I think there were two parts of your question.
Yeah, it does. So does the new regulation by the federal government strengthen the requirements of how the coal ash is dealt with? I mean, are there real changes in what the landfill or the utility will have to accomplish as we adopt that federal regulation?
Yeah, there are. Mindy, go ahead if you'd like to, please. Let them hear from
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. I mean, they have liner requirements. They have requirements for managing the fugitive dust. They have numerous operating requirements, things that encourage this or require the stability of the landfills and the surface impoundments, so that you don't have a disaster like what occurred in North Carolina and in Tennessee.
Well, so right now we don't have lined pits.
We don't. Our industrial landfills, not only coal ash, but industrial landfills generally don't have a liner requirement. This is a pretty intensive synthetic liner. I think it's a dual synthetic liner.
It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they're substantially more restrictive than anything we've had at the state level.
So you were talking about how Evergy owns their own landfills. They're right there. So does Sunflower, does Empire own theirs as well? Okay, so are we using any that are not owned by the companies to dispose of the coal ash?
We have one facility that I'm aware of, and Julie, you can jump in if you have an awareness of anything else, but they are, at least some of their material is being disposed of at a subtitle D landfill in Missouri. It's
Okay,
across the border.
all right. Are we accepting anybody's coal ash from other states that they're coming here to dispose of their product, their waste product?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. That doesn't mean it's not happening. I mean, I think that, yeah, landfills don't have to report to us who they're receiving waste from, but certain types of waste require what we call a special waste disposal authorization to be issued by KDHE. And I don't know if we've had to issue special waste disposal. That's a good question, Commissioner Duffy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I would be interested. I would hope that we aren't taking on somebody else's refuse at this point, but okay, so I'm going to move to the proposed adoption of the federal regs. What is your time frame? Is this a multi-year process, or is there a date that the feds have that this must be completed?
So that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. There is not a date imposed by EPA that we're subject to. However, and this is very important, that the reason we are working very diligently on it now is because once a federal permitting program is authorized and promulgated, EPA will have to start working on federal permits. But they have this provision that says for any, if they're participating states is the word, participating states can kind of will avoid, having that dual permitting. And a participating state is considered by EPA to be a state that is demonstrating they're making progress towards adoption. So EPA has told us they consider us a participating state, and they don't think that we'll have a problem with a dual permitting conflict. So we are at a stage in our rule writing, state regulation writing right now that we're getting close. My staff are working on the economic impact statement, the environmental benefit statement. We're still making some final writing some final regulations, but hopefully we'll be ready to actually submit them into the state review and approval process by later this year. That's a long process, as you know.
Oh, yes. Yes, we understand.
Yeah, we're hoping maybe we'll have regs adopted by 2024, and that's when we'll actually then apply for federal program authorization. But like I said, we're working really closely with EPA. Everything I've heard from them, they're satisfied with our progress. They really would prefer not to have to issue federal permits, and they consider us a participating state.
Okay, so do they have, in terms of fines, are their fines more, are they higher than ours for failures or whatever?
Yes, I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are, but yes, if they wanted to go, if they needed to take enforcement against a facility, they have much higher penalties.
So I'm aware that you recently closed a facility near Chapman for failing to meet requirements. How often are you closing facilities for failure to meet state requirements?
That was a relative, a small construction and demolition landfill. That is not something that we took on lightly. I've been the Bureau Director for 4 years. It's the first time we've ever done that. And prior to that, I worked in our Lawrence District office for over 20 years, and I was never aware of KDHE enforcing a landfill closure.
Okay, one more question. How many legacy coal ash landfills do we have in the state? Is there a lot?
Mindy, do you have a number on that? I mean,
I'm looking at my list right now.
I would think that will be very expensive if they're going to be required, for example, to put in a liner underneath their pond or do something. Is that the likelihood of, as a result of the adoption of the federal program, that if they do approve legacy, they're exempt now, but if they become unexempt, is that the type of activity they're going to have to undergo?
well, Mindy, go ahead if you'd like.
I was just going to answer your first question about the number of units. So we have 8 units at 5 facilities.
Okay,
Thanks, Mindy. That's a good number to know. So I think there are several things that could happen, and not just installing a liner. There's a process called clean closure, where you go out and you remove, and this not only applies to coal ash, it's just a general concept in remediation. You remove, they would remove everything, all the coal ash that's in that landfill.
wow.
And
Take it where?
Landfill it, move it into a new lined unit, build a new lined unit, move it into a lined unit, take it to a landfill, but it's called clean closure. So you say we've removed all the material that that carries the contaminants, and then they close that unit. They could leave material in place and be subject to, pretty stringent groundwater monitoring requirements. So developing, constructing, implementing a whole series of groundwater monitoring, and then if they exceed any of the groundwater standards imposed by the federal rule or the state rule, then have to initiate remedial corrective actions.
Does the groundwater monitoring fall under your section or another section in KDHE?
It's within my section.
Yeah, that's
Your
in the
section.
section.
Okay, so you keep it within your confines, even though it's, okay, groundwater management.
It's part of the permitting. It's part of the regulations under which they're permitted. Yeah.
So the utilities are paying for these costs, correct? When they own the landfill on their site, they're responsible for all the costs related to that landfill.
Right, just like they would be for all their air emission sources.
Okay,
And
all
putting
right.
controls on air emission sources, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, I thank you, Chair Keen, and I appreciate you all being here, because I do think this is a really timely topic for us. Also, looking forward to see if the extraction of the rare earth minerals, how that may develop and actually provide some benefit rather than just sit in the ground or in a pond. So thank you.
Mr. French, any questions?
Thanks. I don't believe I have any questions. Just want to say it was a great presentation, and good to hear about something we don't know the details on. Obviously we really appreciate all the permitting and environmental protection you all do. Our interest is more on the financial side and understanding the short and long-term financial obligations of our utilities and potential financial risks long-term of the utilities. And so this has been really helpful to understand the process and the really comprehensive regulations and regulatory processes you all have. So thank you for the time.
You're welcome. We're really happy to get a chance to talk to you. We really appreciate the good questions. Questions help us learn more. And I'm so sorry the map didn't work. We actually developed that map specially for you. And I was looking forward to showing it off. It's a really cool map. So
Maybe we can go back and see if we have it online. Real quick, when there is a fine of somebody like related to a utility, do you notify our staff and share that information? That there is a problem or an issue? Do you
No, I don't.
communicate?
We don't.
We
I
normally
mean,
don't.
that's not a part of our process. No.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, we ought to think about that.
And let me ask you, Commissioner Duffy, do other programs at KDHE do that? I mean, for example, the utilities are air emission sources. Mindy was an engineer, a permanent engineer in air. That's an interesting question.
I do remember when there were some significant issues years ago, the staff of KCC and KDHE did meet, and information was shared that was very beneficial for our staff to know about the air emissions, scrubbers, that sort of thing, the progress or what was going on at the time. So
I know
I
we
do
met a
think-
lot to talk about the Clean Power Plan and
Yes.
the mercury and air toxics rule.
Yes,
and
I
cross-state
think-
air pollution.
there's a real value to perhaps sharing some information. Yeah.
Commissioner Duffy, I think we also coordinate when it comes to some oil spills.
Oh, definitely on the oil and gas. Our folks are always working with KDHE. But I think this is an area that I just believe there ought to be some ongoing communication. I think it completes the whole discussion about a utility.
Well, perhaps if David Cohen wants to reach out and discuss that more with us, we can talk to our legal staff about how that would work
Okay,
as well.
all righty. Thank
Sure,
you.
you want me to talk to John or you guys directly?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, David?
Do you want me to reach out to John or just directly to you guys?
Why don't you reach out to John? That's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Julie, Mindy, thank you so much for your presentation. I don't really have any questions either. We have seen fairly recently a presentation, an authoritative one, I would say, that with respect to the rare earths that they may be contained within these things, you might want to pursue that. You might even want to pursue that with the EPA or with the other federal agencies you're dealing with, because it might be nice that in advance of their rulemaking, whatever potential impact this might have is contemplated. I just throw that out for you to consider. All right, very good. Well, again, thank you for being here. We appreciate your presentation very much.
Right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Very good. Commissioners, at this time, it appears to me that we have reached the end of this meeting. Unless you have anything further you would care to bring before this meeting, I would entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Take
Take
care,
care.
everyone.